I'll talk about, first of all, about my relation with John, and I'm going to talk a lot more about that when I show the film tomorrow night. As Becky, right? Sarah. As Sarah said, yes. I did this film holding for camera, right? My son, I mean, this is divine trash. John and I have been friends since we were kids. And I've helped him on a bunch of his earlier films. In fact, there is all right, let me start from the beginning. John's leading lady for the most of his films until his death in 1988, sorry, was a fellow by the name of Glenn Milstead. And he is divine. And all of his roles, except for a couple of his later films, were done in drag. He was John's primary female, if you will, actor. Divine was, I was friends with John, and we grew up together. We partied together, and I knew Divine, or Div, and really, really nice person, really shy person, much different from what you got in the films, in the movie. So back in 1973, I started working for a TV station, a public TV station, and it was my idea to try and do a documentary of some local artists. And the filmmaker I picked to profile was John. And in retrospect, I think I probably did propose the series just so I could have an excuse to go out and shoot some film with John. But in those days, it was all film. We went out with a sound person, and we shot about 6 hours of John making Pink Flamingos. And I was going to, this series that I had proposed for this Maryland public television station, never was approved. So I owned the footage because I bought the raw stock and I paid for the processing. And I kept it in my refrigerator, or actually a series of refrigerators, for over 23 years. And it became a running joke. I'm going to repeat the same thing tomorrow night, but it became a running joke between John and me because he kept saying, "You're never going to use that footage." When I realized that '98 was the 25th anniversary of Pink Flamingos, I took John out to lunch and I said, "You know, that footage, all that documentary footage I shot of you making your most infamous film, Pink Flamingos, you kept saying I was never going to use it. Well, I want to use the footage. I want to do a documentary about you and Divine. And I want your blessing and your Rolodex." And he said, "Fine." So he introduced me to a lot of the filmmakers I wound up interviewing for my film. And then I took the film out, or I entered it in the Sundance, and lo and behold, it won Best Documentary. It surprised me. I mean, in fact, I was sitting there with my co-producer, a woman at the time, and when the awards were announced, I was not expecting it. I got up and I felt like I was walking through Jell-O or something, because you feel like you're walking in slow motion. And I've talked to other people that have won awards, and they say the same thing. You feel like you're in slow motion. But all you can think about, honest to goodness, is don't trip. Because you got this cameraman following you up the aisle, right? And the worst thing was that when I accepted the award for Best Documentary, I forgot to thank my partner. So when we had the big premiere in Baltimore, I got a duplicate of the award. You think Sundance is a big deal, right? They give you this little tiny fiberglass award, so I got a duplicate one for my partner and gave that to her that night. So it was a real labor of love, because John and I first met when we were probably like 16 years old, and have known each other ever since then. And I've worked on a bunch of John's earlier films, and in the early days, we didn't really have a job. You weren't an assistant camera person or grip or gaffer or even gopher. You just showed up and did whatever was needed because in those days, I mean, some of the scenes in John's films, all we had was one light. In fact, the famous scene, which I'll show parts of tomorrow night, was the burning of a trailer. Pink Flamingos, Divine, and her family live in this trailer. And in the end of the film, the trailer is burned down. Well, they had to find a place to put the trailer, and a friend of John's had this property out in the county, and he had this long road up to the top of a hill, and they put this trailer on the top of the hill. And they had to run extension cords for almost a mile, you know, for the one light. And then in the end of the film, the trailer's burned down. Well, John's family owned a company called Fireline, which is a fire prevention company. In fact, they've grown to the point where they put out some oil fires in Kuwait and things like that. Well, John was supposed to work for the company. He worked for them for about a half a day. Right? His grandfather started it, and his father ran it, and it was supposed to be handed over to John. And John said, "No, I'm not doing that." So John's brother actually runs the company now, and was in charge of lighting the fire, the trailer fire, and supervising it to making sure it didn't burn down the surrounding woods. And John's brother Steve talks about the problems that they had. They warned all the neighbors that they were shooting, you know, and they said it would be a small controlled fire. It's huge. It's huge. Luckily, it didn't burn everything around. But the thing about John's early films were a little outrageous, I guess, if you see his early films. I mean, like Hairspray and Crybaby and even Serial Mom with Kathleen Turner, who was the voice of Roger Rabbit, right? And Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the cartoon? It's Kathleen Turner. His early film is nothing like that, because those films were all shot 35 millimeter with a big crew and all that. John's earlier films were shot on 16 millimeter with a real skeleton crew. Like I said, we just show up and do what we had to do. And when I decided to do this documentary on John, it was very convenient because I was also an actor in Pink Flamingos. And so I was there for all the rehearsals and for the shooting. And sometimes I play a reporter who's shooting a press conference. And I'm actually rolling film in the camera, because in 1973, it was all, not video, it was all film. And it's, as I say, I saved all the footage for years. But I think it's important to kind of gauge John's sense of humor, his sense of parody and satirical sense, by looking at his earlier films. As I mentioned to I think Becky, right, earlier, that one of the most outrageous scenes in Pink Flamingos that everybody knows, everybody talks about, is when Divine eats dog doo-doo. And Divine, oh, you know, okay, Divine really did. I was there, in fact, in Divine Trash, I'm following John around and I'm shooting it, and John said, "You can shoot anything you want, don't shoot the actual act." So in Divine Trash, I showed John's down on his hands and knees and shows Divine how to do it. It was so important that Divine did it, we call him Div, that Div did it in one fell swoop, you know, because John was working with a wind-up Bolex, and when you had the Bolex on a full wind, it's 18 seconds. So John said it's got to be done in 18 seconds from start to finish, because otherwise, if we have to cut, people will think it's faked. And I know that people know that scene, and I saved it to the end of my film. And I interviewed psychologists, I interviewed 2 psychologists, I interviewed a lot of people. The head of the MoMA film department, interviewed him. They all talk about it because, you know, as John says in the film, it's a first, it's a last. Nobody's ever going to do it again. It's not even a sin in Catholicism to do that, you know. And everyone talks about it. In fact, Divine really got tired of talking about it, because for a while there, for years, it was the first question anybody would ask. did you eat dog? And yes, Divine did. Divine's reason for doing it was that it was in the script. It was in the script, right? Right, like that's the reason for doing it. But Divine was a real, was a terrific actor. I mean, Divine would take all kinds of direction. Anything John wanted Divine to do, no matter how crazy, and how much crazier can it get than that, right? Was to do whatever John wanted. I mean, in the film that John did after Pink Flamingos, called Female Trouble, Divine has to jump in this, in the stream. It wasn't a river, it was a stream, but the water was moving swiftly. Here's Divine in full drag, and it's cold out. Jumps in the stream and swim across it. I mean, the ultimate actor. When I met John's Divine's mom. Divine's real name was Glenn Milstead. He was born and raised in Baltimore, and his mom, I interviewed her for Divine Trash, and she said to me, she said, "Would you be interested in doing a book about my son?" I said, "Yeah, why not?" And this is the book. Hold the camera. This is the book. Feel like, who is it? Jimmy Fallon, how they always hold things to the camera. Yeah, and I said, sure, I'd love to. So my co-writer on the script of Divine Trash was a fellow by the name of Kevin Heffernan, and he and I said that we would, we would be glad to help Frances Milstead write the book. Well, I said to Frances, I said, if we're going to write this book, we need a place to start, okay? So I bought her one of those cassette tape recorders, and I said, why don't you just start dictating into the tape recorder, and we can transcribe that and use that as the basis. She never did. She was a big smoker, and we went down to Florida where she was living in a retirement community, and she put it right by the area and her where she always sat at the breakfast table. She never recorded one line. I said, Frances, would you think about writing it? She said, okay, I'll write it. So she wrote it longhand, and almost indecipherable cursive. So when we got it, I said to Kevin, I said, this is, and it was not in chronological order, the way it is in the book. So I said, I'll tell you what, I split the pages in half. I said, here, you get half and I get half, and we'll have to translate these. We'll have to rewrite her writing. So what we tried to do, one, we had to figure out what she was writing. We had to put it in chronological order the way it is in the book, but also we had to make some sense out of it. And at the same time, from those of you who are writers, we wanted to keep Frances' voice. And I think we did, because at least the people who have read it feel that we did. But that was important to us, so that we could tell her story, My Son Divine. And that's one of my favorite pictures of Divine. And that's from Pink Flamingos, with the high hairline. Yeah. And this is the premiere in Baltimore at the great Art Deco movie theater we have called the Senator. Did you get it? Okay. And that's John and Divine in the front there. Divine without makeup or anything. And this premiere, and for John's films and Divine, they got the first class premiere with the Klieg lights flashing and all that. And Divine got the best reviews of his life. And 30 days later, he was dead. And if you have to go out on a high note, that's the way to do it. And Divine, this was going to be his last role as a female. And he was cast to play an uncle in the TV show Married with Children. And he was all set to be the kindly old uncle. And Hey! I guess what happened was the studio called up his manager Monday morning, 9 o'clock, Divine was not at the studio. He was in LA, but he wasn't at the studio. So they didn't know what happened. They went over to Divine's apartment, and Divine, well, Divine was not much taller than me. Where's this picture? This is me and Divine from, which is this? This is from, polyester. If you know anything about John, this is the one with the scratch and sniff cards. Yeah, John had these cards manufactured that a number would flash on the screen, and then you would scratch the card and you would smell it. You know, it was just, like dirty tennis shoes, and Divine sticks her head in the oven one time, so you get the smell, an oven smell, and it was known for that. So here's Divine. Divine is not that much taller than me, right? And yet Divine wasn't quite as heavy here as he was at the end. Divine weighed over 300 pounds, and Divine was probably only that tall. And Divine died of sleep apnea. He had to sleep sitting up. He couldn't lie down like you and I do. And apparently, when they got to his apartment, his room at the motel, he was lying in bed and he had passed away. And they surmised that he just probably so happy to be involved and married with children, he just laid down like you and I do and suffocated. It's a shame, because he was about ready to start a new phase of his career. He was a terrific actor and a really, really good person. And if you see the Hairspray that a lot of people have seen with John Travolta, Travolta is playing Divine, because John made the first film that was made into a Broadway musical, then was made into the film with Divine. In fact, the film was shot in Canada, in Toronto. And those of us who live in Baltimore, all of John's films are shot in Baltimore. Those of us who live there could not believe how they could make parts of Toronto look like Baltimore. But they did. And it was to the consternation of the film department, the film people in Baltimore. In fact, there are 2 shows that are shot there now, and all my friends are working. One is House of Cards. Yeah, see House of Cards? It's terrific. It's the ultimate binge. Now, I started out I said to my wife and I, we'll watch one hour. Next thing you know, 5 hours later, we're still watching it. And also, Veep is shot in Baltimore. In fact, a lot of my friends were on the cruise. Just the other day, they were on the same street. Somebody hadn't done their homework. Veep was at one end of the street, and House of Cards was the other end. So those 2 shows employ a lot of people in Baltimore. In fact, House of Cards will be shooting up until December, I think they said. So we were, as I said, we were really surprised, those of us who know Baltimore, how much Toronto, how much they were able to make it look like Baltimore. When I did Divine Trash, and I sent a VHS copy to the Sundance Film Festival, and I was surprised when they called me and told me that I was in. And I was really surprised. I thought that since they had a midnight movie section, that's where Divine Trash would be, because that's how John started, as a midnight movie. El Topo, if you know that, El Topo and Pink Flamingos, and even David Lynch's film Eraserhead are sort of given credit for starting the whole midnight movie craze, which was in the 70s. Doesn't exist now. So I thought that's where they would put Divine Trash, in the midnight movie part. But they didn't. They put it in competition, which really floored me, because only 16 films, 16 narratives, and 16 documentaries can be in competition for anything. Whether it's audience favorite, whether it's best actor or best documentary, with just one. So I was really surprised, and it was at the time that I won that the Independent Film Channel came right up to me, and they said, "We love the film. We want to put it on Independent Film Channel, and would you like to do a sequel?" I said, "Sure." So Divine Trash takes John from birth, basically, because his parents gave me 8mm footage of John as a babe in arms and splashing in the ocean surf, and it takes John all the way up through Pink Flamingos. So the In Bad Taste is the name of the second one. I don't have a cover for it. So In Bad Taste, which is a great title for a film, a documentary on John. It takes John's career from right after Pink Flamingos up through Pecker, which was the one he was shooting at the time. And I said to John, that's it. I don't care how many movies you make. I made 2 documentaries on you, and that's it. So a lot of people think that if they watch the Independent Film Channel, they think they've seen Divine Trash, but they haven't. What they've seen is In Bad Taste. In fact, In Bad Taste is a typical feature-length 90 minutes. And when it was placed on Bravo, which is advertisement supported, Bravo is a sister channel to Independent Film Channel, they wanted to make a 48-minute copy of it to allow time for commercials. And they said to me, do you want to cut it or you want us to cut it? I said, no, I'll cut it. I'll cut it. So what people see on Bravo, if they still run it, I'm not even sure, they see a truncated version of In Bad Taste. They think they've seen Divine Trash, but they haven't. Actually, it's one of my goals to put Divine Trash along with extras, with deleted scenes, bring it out, hopefully, in the spring as a 2 DVD set. I think because it's been a while since it's been available, and In Bad Taste has never been available except on the Independent Film Channel. This is another film I made, nothing to do with John, but it's called On the Block. Got it? On the Block. It's the Block is the red light district of Baltimore, and I made a film. I made this film because it's always been kind of the rite of passage for when you're 15 and 16 to go down to this area and go to one of the strip clubs and get a beer. So it's part of our culture. So when it came time to make a film there, I got to know some of the club owners, and we were allowed to shoot there because that whole society, it's a very insular society. Because there are a lot of strip clubs and all that goes on in strip clubs. But my favorite, I've made other feature films too, but my favorite of all, I think, is Divine Trash. My wife thinks In Bad Taste is better than Divine Trash. I said, no, it can't be, because Divine Trash is my first love. Any questions? Anybody have any questions about Divine, about me, about John Waters? I know a lot about John. I know where he lives. I can give you his address. No. We've been friends since we were teenagers, and if I call John and leave a message, I know within 24 hours I get a return call. So he's really good about that. And he actually hasn't done a film since Perfect Shame. Anybody have IMDb on there? His last film was Bitter Shame, Perfect Shame, something like that, and he hasn't made one since then. He's got a Christmas film that he wants to do called Fruitcake, a Christmas film for kids, but he hasn't been able to get the funding for that yet. In fact, one of the, in Hollywood and New York, you're only as good as your last project, right? So when Cry Baby was made into a Broadway musical, it didn't go. It bombed. And so it's because of that, John surmises that he hasn't been able to get funding for Fruitcake. Several connotations of the word fruitcake, but there is a section of Baltimore that it's overdone at Christmas time. Lights across the whole neighborhood. Do you know of it?
Yes, I go there every Christmas season.
34th Street, right? Yeah, well, you know what I mean.
Yes.
Every house is, decorated to the hilt, and they string lights across the street, and it's really campy, right? Well, John wants to shoot his film there, and he said if he ever got the money to do Fruitcake, which is a Christmas children's story, he says, that he will definitely, even if he doesn't get the money, if he can't shoot it in the wintertime, he will pay to have the houses redecorate themselves for the movie. But the script's been around for a long time, so it's the one he wants to do next. I don't know if he ever will, because he just came out with a book. And he's written some books. Just came out with one. Do you know about it?
Yeah, it was on NPR.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called Car Sick. And John hitchhiked across country. He lives in Baltimore, right 2 blocks from Johns Hopkins University. And I live like 2 blocks the other way from Johns Hopkins. And he hitchhiked from Johns Hopkins to San Francisco. He actually hitchhiked. And the book is about his hitchhiking adventures. In fact, it's in 3 parts. One part is the worst possible, it's fiction, the worst possible hitchhiking rides he could possibly get. And another part of it is the best rides he could imagine. And the middle part is the real rides. But I said to John, I know that you had a buddy about 2 blocks behind you, right, following you. He said, no, he didn't. All he had was one bag and GPS and of course a cell phone. But he said a couple of times he stood one spot for 10 hours. We always hitchhike a lot when we were kids, but hitchhiking nowadays is not like it was. I used to hitchhike to Florida and back for spring vacation, but not anymore. To me, it's kind of dangerous, but John did it. John did it, and that's the book, Car Sick. I haven't read it yet, but I'm waiting for it to come out in paperback, not hardback. So if you want to ask me questions, that's probably because otherwise I'm saving the presentation for tomorrow night. So I've got some great film clips from my film and from John's films. But Becky, you had a question.
Well, I'm not exactly sure where to start with the question.
Okay, anywhere you want.
Could you tell me a little bit more about the filming process for
From my film or John's?
either one?
Either one. Well, with mine, I came up with the idea of doing a documentary on John, and I had proposed a series of documentaries on local artists, friends of mine. And as I said, I think it was just an excuse to shoot some documentary footage of John, because behind the scenes documentaries were not nearly as prevalent as they are today. Probably only a very few were done in those days. So what I did was, since I was working for a TV station and it was all film, on my days off, and we could borrow equipment from the film department, I would go out with a sound person and we would shoot, and I shot 6 hours of John doing Pink Flamingos, and then interviewed a lot of people that knew John, that were friends with John, other directors, like Steve Buscemi, you know him from Boardwalk Empire, yeah.
Sopranos.
Right, exactly. Steve Buscemi, we interviewed him. It's funny. You ever seen Reservoir Dogs?
Yeah.
Okay, he's what, Mr. Pink? Remember? They all have color names, right? So I had a couple conversations with Steve, and he agreed to be interviewed, right? So we're in this friend's apartment in New York City, and I had a couple young people on the crew, and I said to one guy, I said, look, you guys have seen Reservoir Dogs, right? Listen, he's still pissed off about that. So whatever you do, don't call him Mr. Pink, right? So then I told somebody else, it's okay. Privately from the others, I said, it's okay to call him Mr. Pink, right? So I went downstairs and I said to Steve, I said, one of these guys is going to really go off on him. So Steve walks in and he says, hi, Mr. Pink. Buscemi got right up the kid's face, and the kid's scared to death, and I broke out laughing. Good guy, really nice guy. And so John put me in touch with a lot of directors. Jim Jarmusch, his films, Steve Buscemi, and others, Hal Hartley, and I was able to interview them. In fact, the second part, In Bad Taste, I interviewed Debbie Harry, I interviewed Kathleen Turner. Have you seen it?
Oh, I was just thinking of Blondie.
Yeah, Blondie. Right? You're nodding. I thought, wow, how did she see it? Yeah, and Lily Taylor, she's another actress, and all these people that, you know, were, and Kathleen Turner, of course, were not for John, I wouldn't have been able to interview them. So it takes a long time. It can take a long time, particularly if you're teaching and doing other things, to make a film. When you do a documentary, there's a lot of editing. So you shoot a lot more than you use. But I have to say, I had to be pretty careful because it was on film, and film is very expensive. So I had to be very careful about the questions I asked, because you know, with digital or videotape, you can just go on, but film, you got to be careful. So I had to really construct the questions I asked. In fact, sometimes if the interviewees were going on and on, I would signal my cameraman to cut off. So we would pretend we were still shooting, but I knew what they were saying. They were going off on a tangent that I wasn't going to be able to use. But you know, I didn't want them to know that we stopped the camera. So, in fact, I did that with one of probably the key interviews with In Divine Trash. Maryland, the state of Maryland, was the last state to have a film censor board. We have the last film censor in America was this little old Italian woman named Mary Avera, right? Who had, now I'm not kidding, had a 6th grade education. She ran the film censor board. It was a political appointee because she was in the Italian neighborhood of Baltimore. She was always able to get votes out, right? So the governor appointed her the head of it. And John hated her. In those days, if you showed a film, if you showed it in a church basement where John started out, his films did not have to be reviewed. I mean, they couldn't, if you were showing on a college campus or a church basement, you know, the censor board couldn't intervene. But if you were showing them publicly in a regular movie house, then they had to be reviewed by the censor board. Well, this Mary Avera would be standing at the door with a pair of scissors when John would come in with a print. And film prints in those days cost a lot of money. I interviewed Mary. I knew I wanted to get Mary because she was so important to the developing of John, actually. One of the interviewees, one of John's people, he called his group the Dreamland Studios, the Dreamlanders, and one of the guys says in my film, you know, if it hadn't been for Mary Avera, John probably wouldn't have had the reputation he had. So anyway, I called all around the city, every Avera in the phone book. I said, by any chance, would you be related to Mary Avera, the old censor board lady? And one of the last ones I called said, oh yeah, it's my mother, she's right here. You want to talk to her? So I got her on the phone. I told her I was doing a film about the Maryland Censor Board, and she said, well, I'm up here visiting my son, but I live in, where's Disneyland in Florida? Where is it? Orlando. I said, I live in Orlando. She said, if you want to come over, I'll be here for 2 more days. And I said, fine. So I got the crew together and we went over there. And one thing in Baltimore that you try and avoid, I don't think I have what we call a Baltimore accent, but a lot of Baltimore people do. And Mary Avera really did. So, and anyway, so we went over there and she was really sweet. She made little sandwiches for us and everything. And I started talking about the censor board, right? And we were not rolling film, you know. And I said, Mary, do you remember that filmmaker, what was his name? John Waters. You remember John Waters? Were you on the censor board when he brought his films in? Meanwhile, that's all I wanted, right? She went apoplectic. She said, oh, okay. Particularly with the infamous dog doo-doo scene, you know, she went ballistic. And it's a great, great interview. And she said to me, she said that I felt kind of bad, but it's a wonderful part of the film because she said to me that in Orlando, since he was the last film censor in America, right? And in fact, she was interviewed, some of the old guys, Johnny Carson, all that, and she was really embarrassing with her Baltimore accent, you know, and she was, she said something on one of them, Johnny Carson. She said, "Don't talk to me about sex. I'm Italian," you know, things like that. So the governor at the time said, "Whoa, we got to do something about this." So not the governor that appointed her, but another government finally wound up abolishing the film censor board. But every film that was shown in a movie theater had to be viewed by Mary. And in fact, I went down there a couple times, and they would be watching 2 or 3 feature films at the same time. But also, they had to review all the little peep show movies, you know, the porno films. And I'm not kidding. They had the little 16 millimeter porno film playing and the feature films. Now, the thing is, they could not censor language. They could only censor, you know, the images. And therefore, she couldn't cut the dog doo-doo eating because that's nothing illegal about that. But she said to me that she got requests at her home in Orlando to be interviewed every time censorship came up, you know. But they were talking for a while about putting some chip in the TV cameras called the V chip. She turned down every interview or every offer to interview her. So I felt, you know, I felt privileged. But I told her I was this good Catholic boy. Actually, I think I was raised Lutheran or whatever. Nothing now. I said, I'm this good Catholic boy, and I want to talk to you about the censor board. So it's really, in fact, there's I just lent my footage to another filmmaker in Baltimore who's doing a film all about the censor board. And he said, I understand you have this incredible interview. So I gave him a copy of it. Of course, you know, he can't use it unless he leases it. In fact, a lot of footage from, there was a film made called I Am Divine recently. I don't know if you know about it. But Jeffrey Schwartz is the guy who did it. And in fact, he leased a lot of my footage from Divine Trash for that. So the process, getting back to the process of making a film, is involved. In fact, it's much different in those days. When you finally get the film cut, and the film was cut on film, we make a work print. A work print is a copy of the original, and that's what you cut, because it gets scratched and all that. And then you have to take and what we call matching. You have to match the cut work print back to the original in order to make a print. But you have to go through many processes, and one of them is deciding whether or not the print is right. And the lab will make a print of what you give them, you know, and it's called a check print. And you have to check it for color, for contrast, for sound and all that. And sometimes, you know, you would have to get 2 or 3 check prints from the lab before you found one that was right. So I don't like color correcting in the final cut or something. So it's a much more expensive process because the processing is expensive, and so is the lab work. In fact, there's a film that I showed to my students. I teach acting for the camera at Towson in Baltimore, and I had my students watch a film, Jim Jarmusch's first film, called Stranger Than Paradise, and he didn't have much money. It's a great film to watch. Didn't have a lot of money, so he shot it in black and white. It's 1983. In those days, black and white film was cheaper than color. It's hard to get it processed nowadays. There are only a couple labs, I think only one in New York that process black and white film. So Jim Jarmusch shot all the films, shot in black and white, but he also shot all master shots. Now a master shot is a wide scene with all the, you know, if you want to do the entire film from, you know, one camera perspective. It's the entire scene from beginning to end. So I mean, you can move the camera and you can zoom in and out, but the characters stay in a fairly wide shot. That's called your master shot, and then you get what you call coverage, which means you go in and get the close-ups and the medium shots and cut it all together. So Jim Jarmusch just did master shots. And in fact, he didn't even fade out or fade in, because in the lab, you have to pay for those. and they're about $5 a piece. Fade outs, fade ins, dissolves, they're all. So he just cuts to black. So if you ever get a chance to watch it, it's all master shots, and he just cuts to black. So the first assignment for my directing class was to do a master shot in black and white, just like Jim Jarmusch did. But it's a great technique for teaching directors how to work with actors, because it's not about the camera work, it's not about the cutting, it's all about the performance. To me, that's the most important thing. And I tell them, I say, if you're making documentary films, that's one thing. But if you're making narrative films, you need to know how to work with actors, because without a performance, you don't have it. And there's another film I always show that really points this up. Anyone ever heard of the film The Celebration? It's a Danish film by a fellow by the name of Thomas Vinterberg. And it's in 1995, 4 Danish directors got together and they decided to put together a manifesto on how they thought film should be shot. And it was all about the writing and the performance. And the manifesto said, okay, it had to be consumer videotape. You couldn't put any lights. You could only use light was available, whether it was exterior light or inside light. You couldn't add any sound effects. You couldn't add any post-production music or any of that to it, because they wanted to concentrate on the pure cinema. They didn't want to have to be bogged down with all these trailers and all these, craft services stuff. So it's an interesting film to see. It's in Danish, but the camera work is all over the place. And the lighting is sometimes, in fact, there's one scene outside where one of the sons, it's about the father's 60th birthday party. It's a big gathering. And one of the sons has a confrontation with the father at night. And the only light, luckily there's a light on the outside of the barn. That's the only light source. So sometimes they're in pitch black. But still, you get the performance. So I show that to my film students, and I say, it's not about camera angles or camera placement or lighting or lenses. It's about performance. So, but it's a longer process getting a film made on film. Nowadays, it's a lot easier, right? You edit?
I do.
Yeah. What do you use? Which one? Premiere?
Yes, Adobe Premiere.
Adobe Premiere, yeah. A lot easier today. A lot easier. Do you edit?
Yeah, I'm actually making a documentary right now.
Oh, what's it on?
Well, I'm interviewing, right now I'm in the early stages, I'm interviewing people about study abroad programs. And
Okay.
I'm actually going abroad to New Zealand next semester, so I was going to document that.
I've always wanted to go down under. Yeah. You're going to Kiwi country, huh?
I'm going to Kiwi country,
Yeah,
Wellington.
wow.
Yeah.
And interview students from here that have gone to, oh, that's great. Yeah.
Yeah.
What are you shooting on? Camera like that or
No, I'm shooting on a Nikon DS.
D60 or something like that?
No,
Or,
D5. It's a DSLR camera.
Yeah.
I just don't know the exact number.
what are you doing for sound?
I have a small boom mic that I.
Put on top of the camera?
Yeah.
That's not bad.
Yeah.
It's better than the mic in the camera,
Mhm.
right? Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So I've been doing that. I went to the AFI documentary festival this summer.
In DC?
In DC.
Okay.
I live right by DC.
Okay.
So so I've been up to Baltimore a lot, and so yeah, that was always interesting, and so yeah, that's awesome about the Sundance.
Yeah.
I wanted to, because I'm going abroad, I don't have to leave till later. I don't have to go until March, so I was gonna take a cross-country trip to Sundance, but I don't know if I will. Because finance.
Save your money.
Yeah,
It's very expensive now.
yeah.
In fact, I've only been back once since 1998 when they won the award, and I swore that I wouldn't go back unless I had another film in the festival, because when you have a film in the festival, and as I mentioned, only 16 narrative films and 16 docs can be nominated for any kind of award. When you're one of those 32, you get limoed everywhere, you get interviewed, get to meet Robert Redford and all that. And you also get a competitor's pass that gets you in everywhere. It's really difficult and expensive to see films out there now.
Yeah.
I've just talked to 2 friends of mine about it. Yeah, I mean, you can buy a first 5-day package or a second 5-day package. It's very expensive. If you get the VIP package, it's a couple $1,000s.
Oh, easy.
Yeah.
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 I think there's like a $10,000 package.
Is there really?
Yeah. Yeah.
So no way I'm going back unless I
Yeah.
can go as a contributor. Yeah, that's great. That's great. You know, you ever tried double system documentary?
No.
You know, you can do that.
Okay.
You know, film was actually double system. Film was made with a movie camera. The sound was recorded on a digital recorder. You know, and you either do this or you use a clap stick, and in the editing you put the film, you know, on a film editing machine with the sound, and then you're in sync because you're shooting with 2 different machines. And you can do the same with video. You can use a little portable, like a Tascam recorder that's very good. I mean, they make one called a Zoom for like $300, about that big, and it has XLR inputs. And you can probably, it's pretty hard to do it as one person. You can probably need a sound person, but you can boom the sound and feed it into the have you ever used one of the Zooms or Tascams? Okay, you feed it into that, and then you just get your actor to do that, and that's all you need. And then you sync it up, just like you would in film. You sync it up in post. There's software called Plural Eyes. Ever heard of it? Plural Eyes. You put the picture in, you put the sound in, and Plural Eyes will sync it up for you.
Okay.
Yeah. So pretty cool. Pretty cool. Yeah.
All right.
Okay.
I think we have time for
And-
one more question.
Oh, we actually filled the hour. Okay. Anything else about? You're going into television, right?
Yes, I
You want to
am.
go into television? Yeah. Well, I always say that you can show me 1 minute of videotape, and I can tell you whether the person came from film, theater, or television. The biggest problem, I worked in television for years, biggest problem I have with television is that, particularly with news anchors, you have that much headroom, and you have them directly in the middle of the frame. They're not justified right or left like they are in features. Feature films, you have no headroom. We don't like headroom. And when I was in the studio, I would shoot the baseball games and all that, but for Channel 13 in Baltimore. And when I was on the floor, they kept having to say, Yeager, tilt up. Yeager, tilt. You know, you're on a headset. Yeager, tilt up, because I would have no headroom like we do in features. You know, but when I see videotape of students making films, and they have the actors squarely in the middle of the frame with all this headroom, I thought, they came from television. Do you notice that?
Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. It's only anchors that you know, to do that that direct address also to the camera, but that headroom bugs me. Bugs me. Okay. Any other questions? So when you go to Baltimore, make sure you go to the red light district.
All right. Well, thank you.
Okay, great.
And also, if anyone wants to come to dinner, we have many seats available. Please come to dinner. So
It's when I hear it's a very sumptuous dinner, right?
it is. I do enjoy our catering quite a lot. So.
Oh,
it's
good,
We
good.
have Thai chicken and some pineapple-y thing. So it's good.
You know, I'm always behind the camera. I'm never in front of the camera. So I'd be very curious to see how that came off.
Oh yes, definitely. I will make sure.
Yeah, let them know that I'd like to. I'll talk to